Well, welcome everybody. Very pleased to welcome you as part of our GSBC Cares programming to this afternoon's webinar. You can see the title of the presentation today, Turning New PPP Accounts into Long-Term Relationships. Very pleased to have Larry Young as our presenter today. Larry was going to be a first-time instructor at GSBC in July. But we're going to defer that, of course, to 2021. And so we've asked him to talk about something a little different today. So please take it away, Larry. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tim. And thanks everybody for being a part and joining in on this topic. Tim and I had a really nice conversation about this, as he had alluded to. I was in the banking world for a long time, and really the background was really around turning markets around that either weren't performing well or building teams up so that we would start to dominate market share. And when Tim asked me to be a part of the GSBC, I was extremely excited to do so. But obviously when things had changed, and we were having a conversation around PPP accounts and how these accounts kind of have come to banks. And we all know that community banks, tirelessly worked, to make sure that these customers were taken care of. And in a lot of cases, when I visit around the country, I can see that a lot of these community banks have won. They've really won big, and they've brought in new relationships. But the question I'm getting asked a lot now in the coaching and the training piece of it is really around how do we kind of maintain the longevity of these accounts that have come to us. And so that's where the conversation kind of started. And that's where we want to kind of go here. So what I want to share with you is really the objectives for today. And I'm going to share really 4 of them, and then we'll have time either go ahead and submit your questions if you'd like as we're doing it, and Tim will kind of facilitate that, but feel free to speak up whenever that time is. But what we want to focus on is really 4 key things, and really it's the power. The first one is the power in meeting customers where they are, not just logistically. And some of this will be really common sense for community banks because you all do this very, very well. But where we want to take this is how do we kind of connect with the borrower, the new borrower, if you will, in order to really kind of start cementing that relationship for retention purposes. Secondly, we're going to talk about insight and information. This is the piece that I would spend a lot of time at GSBC in class talking to bankers about how we start to separate from our competitors, how we start to sound different than our competition so that we don't have to necessarily compete on price. And so we're going to kind of scratch the surface today. The third thing that is important right now with these new PPP is really kind of the cross-selling opportunities. And we all know that cross-selling is not just a function of revenue growth, but it's a function of retention. And it also has a stickiness, if you will, to these. So we'll touch on that. And then I want to share a kind of not a new concept. I've been doing this in the markets for quite some time, but it's really around defining the long-term borrower journey. And it's a process that we put in our business developer I train now, and it really puts this piece in there that adds a stickiness, and it also enhances, again, the overall cross-sell. So that's kind of where we're going today. I wanted to share this slide simply. The list could have been much, much longer. But as community banks, you do such a great job for your customers in so many ways. I mean, from the customer service and how you listen, how you build rapport, being ingrained in the community. These are things that community banks do oh so well. I mean, the reason I put this slide in here is very simple. And it's really to tell you that today I'm not going to talk to you about those things. These are things that do create that stickiness and that retention, but I would simply be preaching to the choir. So the strategies that I'm going to share with you today are really to kind of push you above and beyond what you already are doing, and maybe give you some ideas. Well, they will give you some ideas that you can take away today. Okay. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So if I don't mention those things that you're also great at, understand that I already acknowledge that you already do wonderful there. There's no need to talk about it. This is kind of an interesting slide you can see from a retention standpoint. I'll have you take just a quick peek at this. Here's what I'll tell you. So my background is, Tim, as we were kind of alluding to, so I was the individual that was brought in as a market president to rehab markets that weren't performing, and as I said earlier, grow market share. And so in order to do that, we had to focus on, the leadership, the culture, the connection to communities. But moreover, where we're talking today is really kind of that sales piece and creating that stickiness, which is all too important in growing our revenue. Here's what I found though, over all that time, we had to turn over a lot of rocks. We were honestly prospecting and business development machines in that regard. But generally about 70 to 75% of the production in the markets that I served, all of that production came from prospects. Those were new people to the bank. There were people that weren't doing business with us that we were bringing in. And the reason I tell you that history or that little bit of bio is because what I found over time is that there were really three different kinds of borrowers. There were three different kinds of borrowers, prospects that would come to us. And I wanted to kind of share that with you because for some of you, you have PPP accounts that you're already doing a great job prospecting, and you might kind of wonder how you expand your existing portfolio or others. And so I wanted to share that. But the three prospects, if you will, or buckets that these come in this form. The first is what I call the piecemeal. And typically if you've been in banking, we've had these where we've built rapport with clients or potential clients, and maybe they threw us a bone. Maybe they said, look, I'll let you finance this piece of equipment. We'll start there. We'll see how you do. And then you go from there. And the idea is kind of that analogy of how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. It's kind of that way with these clients in that you have to slowly cross-sell them at all times and be able to expand that relationship until you hit that tipping point. So these individuals need a very heavy dose of voicemail, email, sequencing and information to them to be able to kind of expand those. The second group bucket that comes to us, these are the ones that we all love. These are what I call more of the comprehensive ones where we've put some type of big proposal together and we're winning the majority of the business all at once. Now, the interesting thing on these clients for all of us out there is that we get that time to develop the credibility and rapport, and we do all those things like on slide 3 that you all do so well, amongst some other things. And then finally that individual business says, all right, fine, it's time to move. And usually you bring over, 70, 80% of the business right away. Those are the ones that we love. And those also are the individuals that are the most loyal. Now, the conversation that Tim Koch and I had was really kind of around the third bucket. And there's a third bucket of prospects that come to us that I found over time. And these are the ones in which you probably laugh. I can't see your faces, but I used to tell my bankers all the time, these are the prospects that a lot of times you were the bridesmaid or the groomsman, right? You had some type of rapport with the individual, but you hadn't done that vetting process. You haven't done the business development. You hadn't done the rapport. You just kind of knew each other. And what's interesting about these individuals is a lot of times I call these more events. So either the incumbent bank that they're with either dropped the ball on something or said the wrong thing to the wrong person or wasn't able to help them out at a particular time. And the business owner will call you and say, look, it's time to move. And what I found over a couple of decades of doing this is that these customers behave different than the other two buckets. And these customers are very similar to some of these that came to us in the PPP process. Then an event happened, maybe you had a little bit with them, maybe you had nothing with them, but for whatever reason, they decided to make that move or you were there to help them. And the cross-sell opportunities on them are different. The retention opportunities are different. They act and behave different. And so that's really where we kind of continue these strategies. But if you can look some of these stats from a retention point, you definitely want to keep them. So the thing that I'm telling bankers right now with some of these accounts, and it's really important in this third bucket, is the tendency that when we would have these come to us is that we don't want to confuse loyalty. We don't want to confuse loyalty with thankfulness. We don't want to confuse the fact that we were there to help them in the PPP when maybe their bank either didn't answer their call or couldn't respond. Right now, they're in that period of being thankful. But what we want to make sure is that we don't confuse that with loyalty. And so these 4 strategies, as we go through those, are designed to be able to help build that confidence and that rapport. So strategy number 1, I love this. Strategy number 1 is go to the new borrower or your new prospect wherever they are mentally. Now, the first part of this is something that you as community banks, you'll get right away, but it's kind of a build up for the second point. And it's that we always have to make sure that we understand where our new borrowers are mentally. Right now, some of those PPP accounts, we help them out, we help them get the initial funds, but those funds may be waning and they may be trying to make decisions. And so our normal process of trying to create that pour may be different. So it reminds me, this is probably about 10 years ago, I had an ag banker of mine that brought in a nice cattle deal, a cattle rancher, brings the deal in, gets the accounts open, and now I want to set a meeting with this rancher as the market president, and I kind of go over what the buyer journey is, which I'm going to hold you off. That's strategy number 4. But I wanted to cover what this buyer journey would look like. And the buyer journey is really designed to make sure that they enhanced retention and communication. So anyways, he sets this appointment and we're going to go out there, and he comes into a sales meeting with me and he says, hey, just FYI, John, the farmer, canceled our appointment tomorrow because he's going to be sorting cattle. And the ag banker said, I think I'm going to go out tomorrow morning and I'm going to help him sort cattle. And I said, you know what? I'll throw on a pair of cowboy boots. I'll go out and help them. And a couple of the other ag bankers said they would join in. And I even had a commercial banker said, I can come out and help. Are we sorting girl cows or boy cows? And so I kind of laughed at him, but we had to give him a little one-on-one before he went out. But the cool part to the story is that all 5 of us went out and showed up at 6 a.m. the next morning, because that's where the borrower's mentality was. And you can imagine the rapport that you can create in an action like that when you meet them where they are. And of course, it was really kind of cool because there were 5 or 6 of his neighbors there, and they got to see bankers out there sorting cattle, which was kind of funny in some cases, but it really said something. Now, I can't see any of your faces, but I assume that you probably have some heads nodding, and that community banks understand this, and they understand this well. If you want to take it to a little bit more advanced, and we want to go farther than that, there are times when we need to build that rapport. There's times when we need to present a cross-sell opportunity. And what we have to do is bankers, by and large, have to find ways in which we can actually get the borrower to our mentality. So it's a step further, trying to get them to try to understand that we need to meet on something or we need to talk about something. So when I do sales training and sales coaching, inevitably I'll have a banker that will walk up to me or will ask me, they'll ask me questions such as, why is it that when I get a prospect, I've got some rapport with them and they know me, but I can't seem to get a sit down meeting? Or I've got a really good customer that I brought in, but they just never have time to meet with me. And the question that I ask them is the question that I'll ask all of you. And it's really kind of the start of where we're going on this particular strategy is, what kind of value are you providing in that meeting that outweighs the value of what they're doing right now? And usually I get kind of blank stares. When you think about it, all of you, I think there's a couple hundred of you, decided instead of doing what you're doing at work right now, hopefully you're not multitasking, but you chose to join GSBC in this conversation, right? But we all have priorities. If your family member or something called you and said, I'm sick, I'm going to the hospital, you would probably click out of this. So we all understand intuitively that we trade value all the time for whatever we're going to do. I always used to joke with bankers that if you ever met with a prospect or a customer, and I'm sure you've all had this, where the phone, right, the phone rings and they'll look at it, like this, and be like, here, let me shut this off. And they'll turn it off and turn it down. And I always said that if you've got a borrower or somebody that's willing to do that, you've got their attention. If they answer the call, maybe you don't. So back to my original question, is what are you doing in your business development process, or when you're calling these PPP accounts, what are you doing in order to show them that the meeting that you're having is value? And so for some of you individuals that are business banking managers that have bankers report to them, this would be a challenge. Or you as bankers, you would really ask yourself, on every interaction that I'm calling on these new borrowers, any new borrower, even customers, what kind of value am I creating? And so a lot of times, to give you a tip before we move on to kind of the next strategy, is what we want to do is we want to be able to quantify at all times what that really looks like when we're making those calls. So if you think about it, I'll tell bankers, if you kind of visualize this, visualize on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most value, and 1 on top of 2 on top of 3, it's kind of like a thermometer almost, and there's a blinking light, right? And so if I'm a customer, or if I'm a banker and I'm calling out and say, hey, Tim, this is Larry Young over at XYZ Bank. I'd like to come out and talk to you about your business, learn a little bit more about what you do, and then maybe tell you a little bit about what we do. How does next Tuesday sound? That blink meter, if you will, probably is at a 1, 2, or 3. There's really not a lot of value creation when you do that. Now, if Tim is sitting around and has nothing going on and wants to give a tour to a banker, that might be a 3, 4, or 5. But the question that we, as we move through this, is what do you do as a banker to kind of get that value meter of the call, the importance of that call higher? And do you consciously and deliberately think about this? One of the things, and it'll tie, all 4 of these strategies tie together, but it'll start to tie and transition to the next one. Being able to quantify with a borrower, one of these new accounts, say, look, this is Larry over at XYZ. I want to come out and talk to you a little bit about our merchant program, if that's the case, and see if there's a way we've seen right now in your industry that might save people anywhere from $2,200 to $2,300. I'd like to visit. Doesn't matter. That's not overly flashy, but it gives you kind of something where you're starting to quantify the value. The other way that I propose, and kind of where I take bankers, is instead of the original cold call, it could be something like, hey, Tim, this is Larry Young over at XYZ Bank. There's a couple of trends that are happening in your industry, in the manufacturing world that you're in. And these are issues that are going to affect your revenue, your cash flow, and maybe even your ability to borrow in the future. I would like to come out and share with you just 20-minute executive briefing so you and your leaders can really start to kind of head those decisions off at the pass. How does next Tuesday sound? And when you think about it, again, I can't see your faces on here, but when you think about when you're trying to get to where they are, the point of this is you have to create a meeting and set that up in a process in which you're bringing the borrower to where you are mentally. They're starting to see the value. So that's just a simple way. Okay, so let's tie into the next one. Again, Tim, if you see any questions that are pertinent to that, it always gives me a chance to take a water break.
Okay. They just want to know if they can get your slides, Larry. And the answer, of course, is yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. We'll send all this out when we're done, and I'll show you how to get more of this information to kind of draw through this. Awesome. So let's go into the next strategy. Now, this particular strategy is one that is extremely powerful, and I spend obviously next year we will, but the intent would be to spend almost a day to a day and a half with the bankers at GSBC on this, on a deep dive. And in fact, this is not intended to be a shameless plug by any means, but I feel so strongly about this second strategy that I wrote an entire book on this for sales professionals. And the idea is that we as bankers have to move away from prospecting and trying to create a rapport with the bank products that we sell, or just the fact that, maybe we're a 100-year-old business or bank, those types of things. What we want to do is we want to position, if you want to create stickiness, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a conversation so valuable with our borrowers that they would almost pay us for the time. And this is where you as a bank, if you want to grow market share and you don't want to compete on price and you want to have that stickiness, when you start to move to this, to where you're having those types of conversations with borrowers, the bank products and all those things come second. All the while your competitors are still talking about lines of credit and checking account and treasury management. this is a key component to be able to really separate yourself. So I'll tell you a story. It's about 15 years ago. I was a commercial banker, and of course, a lot of us use the RMA spreads, right? And somebody had told me one time that, you know, all banks or virtually all banks use these RMA spreads, but a lot of them don't actually show them to their customers. And I just became, I don't know, obsessed, if you will, about this idea. And it was my first attempt at trying to provide value to a client that helped create stickiness, helped kind of position me as that trusted advisor. And so I would go out with any new borrower, and I even did this with prospects. I would put the spreads in, and then I'd take the balance sheet, the income statement, the cash flow, and then a lot of times the ratios. And what we would do, and where I would create this connection on these insights early on in my career, was I would sit and we as the borrower and me would decide on which ones we felt were important for the dashboard. Like we would create a dashboard. So if they wanted to go from the lower end to the median or the median to the high, what we do is we would partner together. And a lot of times I would use my expertise and say, you know, here's the 3 or 4 that I think are important. And I can't tell you how many customers would tell me, this is awesome. I've never had a banker that would take the time to do this, because what they wanted to know is, were they barely approved or were they easy to approve? And what did the bank see as risks and those types of things? So I shared that. And this was my first attempt. But here's where it all changed. And this is really the point to strategy number 2. I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm with the CFO. There's a bigger company, a CFO and the CEO, and I'm going through the spreads. And I get done and the CFO looks at me and he says, Larry, he goes, I know how to calculate virtually every one of those ratios. I understand what you're doing. This is extremely invaluable. But my question is, why is it that with our business, you pick these 3 ratios? Why is it that these 3 ratios were the ones that you could have picked out of the hundreds that I see here? Why are these so important for my business? And what I understood, I mean, I stopped for a second. Of course, I muddled my way through it. But what I understood that day is that your sophisticated borrowers, the ones that you want to retain, the ones that you want to bring on, what they want to know is what they don't know. What they want to know is that a banker understands their business. And what they're looking for is a deeper insight. And I'm telling you, this became the catalyst for our market, I won't say domination, but our market growth, was how we were going to provide insights to these particular clients so that we could continue to do that. I love this stat. There's tons of research to back up these particular points, but I love this one by LinkedIn. LinkedIn did a survey of 1,500 borrowers. These are the decision makers. These are the people that you're calling on. These are the decisions, the people that you're trying to bring the banking relationship over or enhance, cross-sell, those types of things. And as you can see here, if you read ahead, 91% of them, what they want is they want insights and information from the sales professionals, the bankers that call on them. As I said, what they want to know is what they don't know. And most of all, what they want you to do is not really you're trying to run their business, but what they want to know is that you know what's going on in their industry and you have a thought. You can have a conversation, as I said earlier, so powerful, they'd almost pay you for the time. And this creates stickiness on not only the PPP accounts, but all of your accounts. And it's really, again, you're not running their business, but you're having a deeper level conversation. Go back to strategy number 1 for a second and think about that value meter, right? You have a value meter that's blinking, and now you're in a sales meeting and you're having a conversation that engrosses them and connects you as a trusted advisor. If you go out there and your line is, hey, thanks for having me out here, you know, tell me about your business, then you have just admitted to that individual borrower that you know less or that you're there somewhat to be educated. And that's not creating stickiness in today's environment. That's really evolved over time. But this is an extremely powerful way. And it really sets up, you think, strategy 1 with the cold call, because now I'm calling because I have something to say. I wanted to share with you, you can see those tips down there. I think in the GSBC, I probably will share 30 or 40 tips in those days, different ways on different tiers. You've got your immediate information, but how you can quickly find. So if you're in the PPP process, and let's say you bring over manufacturing, I'll just stay with that today. You bring those over, there's some great, you can look at industry articles and association websites. I always look at presidents' newsletters because typically at the end of the year, these are just quick hit ideas. They'll talk about trends in the industry. Those are really powerful. One of the things that I used early on in my career is Google Alerts. If you've never used those, that's really basic. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go farther than just ripped from the headlines. So the Google Alerts, I used to set those up on all of my top 20 customers or top 20%. So, and the owner. So that way, if anything happened in their world, I would get an alert. You can also refine those over time so that you don't get so many emails because you can get a lot of them. Podcast is something I talk to bankers out and coaching. You know, what podcast are you listening to? Let's stick with manufacturing. But you could, if that's a new customer you brought in, you can find tons of podcasts on manufacturing. And what I look for is I look for experts inside of there that are talking about either trends in the industry or problems that that industry is facing. And what it does is it gives me a higher level conversation to have with my customer, because what I'm doing is I'm separating from the bank products. I'm not going out to pitch a product. I'm out there to pitch the trusted advisor. I throw out a couple other ones. There's tons of them. Oh, this is a cool one. If you Google, this is just a little bit of a hack, but if you Google, let's say like manufacturing trends in 2020, let's say that you want to have a conversation with a good prospect. If you do that, you're just going to get tons of stuff, right? Tons of superfluous blogs and repeats and ads. But what I do is if I type that in like manufacturing trends, I'll put .pdf or .ppt for PowerPoint. And what you'll find is this is a slick way if you want to find some real recent trends or some things that are happening or some talking points for your particular new borrower. And it's really kind of cool because when you do like the PDF and you go down through there and you do the search, you can do it by most recent in Google. I'm just using Google for whatever your choice is. But then you can go down and you can find, like I said, you'll find something like Baines or maybe McKinsey, or you'll find some consultant report that has something out there that is really, really valuable. And this is a fantastic way to kind of, rather than go through it on the websites, to find some initial information. And there's some more robust. Think about the cold call. I got that pro tip there. Think about the cold call that I kind of facilitated there with Tim for just earlier. And when you think about, when I call out and I say, look, this is Larry, I'm a senior lender, XYZ Bank. I want to come out and talk to you about your business and learn more about what you do, and then tell you a little bit about what I do, versus, as I said, talking about trends and some type of value offering. It's totally different. If you think about the first one is all about you, isn't it? Which is the death of a banker. It's the death of a salesperson when you're trying to develop business. Because it's all about, I want to come out, I want to talk to you, I want to tour your place, I want to have you tell me what's going on. It's all I. And so the pro tip here is when you're thinking about the RMA spreads or you're thinking about that information, it's all about them. Talk to you about what's happening in your industry, trends that are going to affect your business that you can share with your leadership team. And this is such a great way to build that rapport, that instant rapport and that stickiness with your borrowers that will last a long time, because what they're going to say is, wow, I've never had a banker calling me that's done those types of things. Folks, I could talk about this for about 4 days, so I'd probably better get moving here a little bit. So there's time for questions. Strategy 3, cross-sell at the right time. When I talk to bankers or when I talk to bank executives, one of the things that's always at the foremost of their strategy is, how do I cross-sell and what is the right? And so I'm asked, typically, when is the best time to cross-sell? And typically, the best time to cross-sell is early in the relationship. Simply, it's early in the relationship, but banks have to understand that at that particular time, the trust is absolutely the lowest. Okay, because you haven't built all that rapport yet. And so you want to cross-sell, but you don't. My team's generally dominated in cross-sell. And here's what I always tell executives. If you want a great cross-sell strategy, the place to start is where these strategies tie together is, first of all, know your customer. And then secondly, lead with integrity. Never offer a solution to a customer that does not provide some type of value to them. Okay. But when you know your customer, think about strategy two, it's very easy to be able to kind of have a great ability to suggest relevant products. I want to take for a second, I want to drop back to the three types of profiles that we talked about prospects. When you think about the piecemeal is usually, again, where you get an initial piece of business. Everything that you do after that is virtually a cross-sell until you reach that tipping point. And so really offering those products in a cross-sell fashion can happen at any time. Here's what I tell bankers is I tell them when you're cross-selling that type of customer, so you've got the initial piece, now you want to go out and expand the relationship. It's not so much about timing. It's more about the quality and the value that you offer on that first one. You kind of have to be more right on that particular customer. So you want to make sure that when the next thing that you're proposing to them is truly value and the time is. So it's a little bit more of a generic answer, in my opinion, but really making sure that you really visit with maybe your business banking manager or you as a banker, as a team, and say, what are the products maybe in this particular industry that are really the most beneficial, and lead with those. The second one that I said that we all love, the comprehensive, the timing on that is a little different. Typically, when you bring somebody in after about 70 to 80% of the business and you've got other things that you want to cross-sell, there's no scientific research behind this. This is only my years of experience. I have found that the sweet spot to start really cross-selling additional products on them is usually around that 6 to 8 months after you've kind of started the initial relationship. In fact, I'll give you kind of a pro tip on that. When you think about those particular customers, what I typically would do with my bankers, and I do now, is that I position them about 4 months before their annual renewal, their first annual renewal. And that's when we meet and we start suggesting and talking about products that might make sense, that'll make a difference in their business, either efficiency and things of that nature. But that's a really good time to do that and have it be a buildup all the way to that annual review and start to implement those. It's really honestly just a powerful strategy in terms of timing. The third one, so the third one that I said that comes to us and it's a little bit more of an event like these PPP. What I'm finding and what banks are telling me right now is, again, this is the difference between the thankfulness and the loyalness. And so they're very thankful that maybe the community bank came through for them, but they seem like they're getting like the Heisman. You remember the Heisman, right? Or the stiff arm, you know, where it's like, yeah, we're good right now. And and now we're kind of at that 120 days, 90, 120 days or so. And we're trying to figure out how to cross-sell them. And really the key in these particular ones is to make sure that you have defined what success looks like. So I'm going to give you two big tips for if you're really trying to improve the cross-sell. As I said, when you're trying to do that, your rapport is very low. Here's a strategy that I employed years ago. It was one of those where I just figured if I ever got caught, I'd beg for forgiveness rather than permission. And it was something that I did and my teams did that absolutely made a big difference, and it really enhanced our cross-sell, is that we developed an ideal customer profile. And what that was is, let's just stick with manufacturing. I would look at my manufacturing customers, some of my good ones, the good revenue ones that were cross-sold. And I found out where the value was that we created in those. And I created a one-page sheet that literally I could share. It didn't have anything confidential, but I could share what an ideal manufacturing profile looked like where I worked. And what that was really designed to do was to sit across the table in the part with the defining the buyer journey, which will be our next strategy. So hold on that. But I would sit down with them and say, look, I want to share with you right now where in this meeting, what an ideal profile. This is somebody that does something similar to you in the manufacturing world. And here's the benefits they're having from these particular products. And what we would sit down and do is we would determine with the borrower at the initial part of that when the timing for those events were. So if an example was merchant processing, as an example, we would say, you know what, let's chair that for, you know, a couple months out. This particular thing, this is a now thing. But what I did is I created, as I said, an ideal client profile that they could go. Where I got this idea early in my career, I used to do a lot of SBA loans, even as a generalist. SBA small businesses would come in and I do the SBA financing for them, and they'd stand around and, you know, they needed merchant, they maybe in some cases needed payroll. And I created this 17 years ago. And so then I started using that with some of my other clients. And I'm telling you, it was really, I think, probably one of the top strategies. I know it is in terms of developing that, but to share that. And so feel free to use that. I would tell you, I'll give my disclaimer that, you know, check with the people that you need to check with. I just chose to do a different path, but it was really successful for us to be able to have somebody sit across to you and go, okay, that's what it looks like to bank with you. And this is where I can find the most success in the products and services. And it creates that stickiness. And you can use that on these PPP clients right away. You can use it right away as long as you understand, you know, your portfolio well. I'm going to give you, before I move on to the last one, I'm going to give you one more pro tip here on cross-sell. Again, I do this a lot in the training piece of it, but there's a couple tips whenever you're trying to grow products, when you're trying to sell products to, let's say you're trying to steal it from an incumbent bank, or you brought one of these 3 profiles over, it's a PPP, and now you want to get the merchant, or you want to get their treasury management services and that type of thing. The way in which you present your product has everything to do with it. So if I give them an ideal profile and I'm able to show them, hey, here's the success, there's still power in the way in which it's presented. So down below, you see under the tips, research will back this, case studies back it, and my experience, I've seen this tried and true. People fear loss versus loss of a gain. So you'll fear the loss. If I was to bet you, you'll fear the loss of $100 versus the loss of maybe winning $200. They call it loss aversion. And I'll give you a scenario here where this will really tie into how we present. The second is, if the product that is going to be sold is urgent, that actually favors the incumbent bank. And lastly, and most important, if there's only a single solution out there to cure that borrower's problem, it will actually favor the incumbent bank. So let me bring this together for us before we move on. So some of you may have partners. You'll have partners, maybe it's treasury management partner, merchant, it could be wealth management, doesn't matter. Some of you may have partners, but even if you don't, this makes a lot of sense in your cross-sell. So there was a time when I would bring, let's say, like a treasury management rep out with us. And we bring it out to one of our borrowers, and we were going to cross-sell those particular services and talk to them about opportunities. Now, I love partners because they've got expertise and they ask the right questions and they can answer a lot of the questions. But some partners can sometimes tend to be a little bit more product-centric rather than customer-centric. And so we have to be very leery of this as bankers. So an example of this where it would not favor you is maybe a treasury management says, hey, Tim, you know, I just want to share with you in the manufacturing industry, fraud is on the rise. And the average ticket for fraud in the manufacturing world is about $7,800. And the problem with this, Tim, is that you may not even be able to know that it's happening. In fact, it could be happening to you right now and you wouldn't recognize it until the money's gone. So what I recommend for you is to immediately have us implement fraud filters on your account so that you can be protected. And I'm going to tell you that this is single-handedly the worst way in order to build cross-sell. If you want to build rapport and stickiness, it's the worst way. Here's what research bears out, and I've seen this time and time again. What that customer, that prospect will do is they'll thank you for the time. They'll tell you they're going to think about it, and they will call their incumbent bank and say, help me out. What do I do here? And you'll have made your competitors wealthier or more revenue. The way in which you present any type of offering to a customer or a cross-sell is actually the opposite. Now, I'm not a big, I don't care about loss versus gain. It's true that loss, if you're trying to protect somebody, makes a difference. But you can't make it urgent, and you have to show a multitude of solutions. So instead, it would be something more like, hey, Tim, I wanted to let you know that in the manufacturing industry, fraud is on the rise, and the average ticket is about $7,800. And what we see is organizations like yours in the manufacturing world are sorting through solutions that are more tailored for their organization. Over the next couple of weeks, I'd like to help you sort through. There's a multitude of solutions, all have pros and cons. Tim, who would be the individual in your organization that I could talk to about sorting through that and kind of be a trusted advisor? And when you position your selling this way, you're creating that rapport, that stickiness, and your cross-sell will go through the roof. Single-handedly positioning those difference with the buyer journey makes all the difference in the world. I'm going to move on to the next one. It looks like I got a little long-winded on that one, but I love cross-sell because banks are always interested in how they improve that. The last one is strategy 4, and that is to define the borrower journey. This is something that I started doing again early in my career, and it's kind of refined. I think, in my opinion, for all of you listening out there, I believe that this is one of the strongest, higher level things that a bank can do, bankers can do, in order to satisfy the buyer journey and be able to create retention and build up for cross-sell. So what is it? If you think about defining the buyer journey, either I would do that as the market president, or my bankers, my senior bankers would do it, but you're going out to have a conversation right after you started the relationship that talks about how things are going to work, and you want to understand their side of it and your side of it. And so the first, the easy stuff that you get out of the way in this conversation is things like communication. How do they like it? How often do they like it? You know, what's the timing of their tax returns? What's the timing of the annual reviews? You know, those types of things. How big a notice do they want, you know, before an annual review happens? But we literally sit down and have this conversation. And it also gives me time as a banker to be able to explain a couple things that might be important to us in terms of timing on covenants, things of that nature. But you're defining that journey. Now, that is the first level. The second level is where you get into a conversation with that borrower, and what you're asking them for is, what do they perceive as value? What do they perceive as value that you can provide above and beyond the products and services that you have? So why is this important? Well, because the third part of this, and where you want to take this, is I want to provide my customer, my new customer and existing. I only typically do this, I should have mentioned, on probably my top 20 or maybe top 20%. You can't do this for your whole portfolio. These are for your bigger clients. But every year, I explained to them in that meeting that every year I'm going to give them a value scorecard. And again, this is something I did. I was just going to beg for forgiveness rather than permission. But the idea is really to be able to tell them, look, I'm going to tell you what I perceive I'm giving you in value each year above and beyond what I do. And then we're going to decide what next year looks like. So I'll give you a funny story as we wrap up. But when my wife and I moved to Phoenix, you know, in Phoenix, you got to get a bug repair. You got to get a pest company there, because if you don't, right? And so we bought this house, and it had been sitting idle for a little bit. And if you don't have a pest company, I mean, you'll have scorpions and cockroaches as big as a mouse. I mean, it's terrible, right? So I hired this pest company, and they've got a great payment portal, and they're professional. Their reviews are good. Just, you know, again, met all the criteria. The guy shows up the first time. He's very professional, tells me what he's going to do. And so I'm happy. So this guy sprays our house, again, that had been idle. Now, this is kind of gross, but the next day it was like bug Armageddon, right? I literally had to sweep the bugs out, you know, that type of thing. The next month he comes back and there's fewer bugs. Third month, there's a few. And then by the fourth month, there's none. Now, it seemed like every weekend or every other weekend, there was always somebody knocking on my door saying, boom, 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 you know, we're this pest company, we can do it cheaper, we try this product, we try this service. And I stayed loyal to these guys. But in the end, just like you can have people that are knocking on your customer's door. And this right here creates an absolute retention strategy. And so again, they're knocking on the doors, I'm putting them off and that type of thing. But this starts to get doubt in my mind because I'm paying all this money and I'm really not seeing anything. And so it's about 7 months in, the guy shows up at the door, says, how's everything going? I said, the issue that I have is I'm paying all this money and I don't, I don't see anything. I don't know if it's really doing anything. And he said, do you see any bugs? And I'm like, no, I don't see any bugs. And he looked at me and says, well, then we're doing our job. And it's a funny story and it's one to kind of remember, but the reason that it is really, really important is when you think about slide 3, all the great things that community banks do, you can do as a banker or as a bank, you can do such a great job for your clients that they don't see the bugs anymore. They don't see the issues anymore because you do these things also well so often. And so unless you have a process in place to kind of remind them, kind of like the bug guy did, you really can get picked off. And this is probably one of my greatest retention strategies. So we would literally sit down, as I said, and I would say, here's the things that we did of value, and I would solicit more. So I'll give you a quick, I don't know if you can see that well, Tim. I don't know if the group can, but this is something that's editable. It was very simple, but I just gave some examples in here. You can put their name, their company name, and you can see some of the narrative. What I'm not talking about is like a billing statement from an accountant or from an attorney, no offense, but I'm not saying, well, I sent this email. We're not talking about a checklist of stuff. These are the things that if you're doing strategy 1, 2, and 3, that you should never be at a loss then to be able to remind your client of how you came through. And
Excuse me, Larry. A little tough for me to read with my eyes. Do you mind reading a couple of those so they get a sense of the specific?
Yes. Yeah. So these are, and this is a fake example, but it's designed to give everybody an idea. January 15th, suggested treasury management products, suite of products is anticipated to save $780. April 10th, solve missing payment information, reposted funds, 1-day turnaround, emergency. Emergency turnaround on check orders. Here's a good one. August 5th, sales assistant recognized irregular activity on the account, agreed it was incorrect, solved issue, and implemented positive pay solution to prevent further issues. So these are just examples of those types of things. But I started doing this with like in each of my markets with my top 20 customers. And then a lot of times I would go with the banker or the senior banker could do it themselves. But you're going out to talk to them about, here's what I perceived I did for you above and beyond the products and services. And then in turn, I want to solicit from you, what do you see that I could do better? And this, honestly, I can attribute to it. I'll do this, Tim, and then I'm going to leave it for questions if there are any. This is my contact information. What you can do if you want, you can, if you choose to follow me on LinkedIn or Boiling Frog on Facebook, I post more and more tips. But you can go out to my website, and if you're jotting notes there, there's a resource tab and there's downloadable forms, and those are free. I don't even require an email, but you're more than welcome to go out there. There's trends worksheets, there's pre-call worksheets, there's decision maker worksheets that tie to strategy number 2, and then there's this form. So Tim, if they can't read it, they can go in there, and that's an editable form. They can go in for free, and they can download it and they can narrate it themselves. Again, check with whoever they need to check with, but it's a sweet idea for retaining. So.
Well, you do have an initial question here, Larry.
Okay.
It's,
yep.
Question is, in order to reach out to new clients, what are your thoughts on creating videos to show how the process works? In the onboarding, how-to videos, information videos, etc. Yeah,
I think that it's a great way if you want to try to do something different from your prospecting methods. I think again, I think it's one of those things where you have to kind of be careful what you say in video and make sure that you've got, kind of the approval piece of it down, if you're going to try to solicit either a process or product. One of the things that I recommend is that when you think back on point number 2, which is what I'm fond of, if you want to do videos, do a video about something that's happening in that industry, right? And then how you maybe thought about it with your particular clients, and then send that video to them via email. And you can do that. You can create your own YouTube channel for free. It's cheap and it's easy. And then you can send them the link and say, hey, Carl, I was thinking about you today. I read this, and just send them a quick video. something they can maybe listen on the way home. I think that's a fantastic idea. One of the things I talk about in GSBC, well, I talk about with anybody, is that don't forget your cold calling. Your cold calling is not dead. In fact, your cold calling is very alive and well. So to the person that asked the question, for anybody that's interested in that, as long as you have a methodical sequence of cold call, voicemail, email, and then augment it with videos like that, can be a very powerful strategy to bring those new customers over. In fact, I do it all the time in my world now. So,
Larry, do you have any recommendations of how you might, for all these people actively involved in the PPP program, they have many, 50 to several hundred new clients. Do you have any recommendations for how you prioritize which potential PPP clients that are new that you might attack first to enhance that relationship?
yeah. I don't know if this is a popular answer, but I always give the answer that I think is the best regardless. And I think that you have to kind of look at the revenue potential and the cross-sell potential and the long-term potential of whether that's a particular industry or a particular type of business. And honestly, that's kind of where you're focused. I mean, let's be honest, Tim, we all know on this call that some of the businesses, unfortunately aren't going to make it. And we as bankers have a right to take care of them in the manner that we need to take care of them. But we've also got businesses that are growing and have potential, to grow that revenue. And we were there for them to help them. And those are generally the ones that I'm probably putting most of the primary focus on or telling them to. So.
Yeah. Do we have other thoughts? Any questions from those in the audience? All right. Well, as we're wrapping up, I want to remind that these slides are available, and I hope you have captured Larry's comments about all the additional documents and resources he provides in his website, and you can see his website here. So before we leave, Larry, or any other questions, or do you have any final comments, Larry?
Yeah, I would just mention, I know that you're going to have this out there for some particular time. If any of you are on the listening to this and in reference to one of these 4 strategies, if there's a follow-up question by email is there, I'll try to answer them the best and the fastest that I can, but I'd be willing to do that for GSBC and your attendees to answer whatever questions I possibly can as fast as I possibly can around these 4 topics and go from there. So thank you so much, Tim.
Okay. So here's an observation: a good internal CRM system really helps with the preparation of annual customer value. So
yeah.
Something I assume most of you know. Well, Larry, thank you again for your efforts today. All of those of you in the audience, thank you for participating in our GSBC CARES program. And again, as Larry's volunteered, contact him directly if you have follow-up questions. We will be sending out an evaluation form, and look forward to hearing any of your comments. But thank you for all your support, and thank you again, Larry, for your assistance. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much.